Welcome back. It's a Tuesday, November 17th, and our tropical low that we have been watching in northern Australia continues to near closer to developing into Tropical Cyclone Fina. A high level of confidence now exists that this system is likely to develop into a tropical cyclone with genuine impacts possible. In today's forecast, we're going to cover off on the latest information and developments on this system. Jumping straight into the latest infrared satellite imagery, we can see here that compared to yesterday's satellite imagery, that there has been a significantly increased amount of convection. Now, it is obviously very disorganized at this point in time, but we can see here in the very bright colors, especially the blacks and the whites, indicating that the cloud tops are particularly high in this region, that there is a lot of ongoing thunderstorm activity that has been blowing up with this system. It is quite difficult to tell just exactly where the major activity is occurring around the central circulation, but we do believe it's probably just to the north of the NT top end, between the Tiwi Islands and the northern top end. However, we can see that just the robust nature and the very large spatial extent of ongoing convection does definitely indicate that this system is beginning to ramp up in activity. And this, of course, is very indicative of the environment that it is in, where we have sea surface temperatures within the western top end reaching around 30 to 31 degrees. And this is really helping fuel those thunderstorms that are pushing the convection upwards and helping this system to develop further. This system has probably developed just a little bit faster than what we had initially expected, particularly when we forecast this on Sunday. However, as previously mentioned, this system is still very disorganized and it actually lacks a very distinct tropical cyclone structure. It's more or less a large mass or a blob of ongoing convection. There is a low-level circulation center that is starting to develop and was evident by some satellite passovers. So we do know that it is starting to wrap itself up, but we can see at this point in time, at least, the convection is particularly disorganized. And this is something we'll be watching over the next couple of days to see how this actually does begin to wrap up into a more organized system. And as we see a more distinct tropical cyclone structure that will likely develop over the next 2 to 3 day period. This is not to be unexpected though, as we had said that as the system tracks eastward over the top end through those initial steering winds, that this system was likely to remain disorganized, lacking a considerable amount of development in the last 1 to 2 day forecast period, which you've obviously seen, although there probably is a little bit more convection going on than we had initially anticipated. However, it's still not likely to pose a imminent tropical cyclone development threat, at least in the next 12 to 24 hour period. However, beyond that, we do expect that there is a high probability of this developing into a tropical cyclone, which would be named Tropical Cyclone Fina. Now, if we do take a look at the visible satellite imagery, just to take a look at how this system is looking in real time, we can see here that compared to yesterday, it does have a much more distinct spiral-like appearance. The spiral bands actually extend right down through the Northern Territory and then certainly through the outlying islands north of the top end. It is particularly disorganized on that southwestern corner. There is a lot of ongoing convection into the northern quadrants, both the northeastern and northwestern quadrants, which is where the main thunderstorm activity is occurring. However, we can see the small amount of rotation around the low-level circulation center is probably just positioned north of the Tiwi Islands very slightly. It is starting to wrap up a little bit and beginning to rotate around that circulation, as we can see in each frame of the satellite imagery that it is rotating now clockwise, indicative that there certainly is a low pressure center there. Though it is pretty transient at this time, and the pressure at the central circulation is estimated to be around 1003 millibar, so pretty weak at this point in time, but we do expect that will continue to drop over the next couple of days as it matures into a tropical cyclone. But certainly the most intense convection currently ongoing in the northern portions of this system. And then of course our large banding that we just spoke about as well is a good indicator of strong poleward outflow associated with the thunderstorms in the upper levels that are helping to generate that low level circulation center and will result in a pressure drop over the next couple of days. If we switch to the Bureau of Meteorology's official tropical cyclone forecast, we can see that they have now issued a track map for this potential tropical cyclone. We can see here that it is positioned at this point in time as a tropical low just north of Darwin and the Tiwi Islands. And then over the next couple of days, or the next day to 2 day period, we do expect this as a tropical low. that will obviously begin to ramp up in intensity. We can see in the sort of semicircular shape in the pink outline that this indicates that gales may develop as early as tomorrow within the next 24-hour forecast period, and then certainly within the next 24 hours on top of that, so around 48 hours in total, we can expect a tropical cyclone to develop, which would be a category 1 intensity currently on this track map. And then within the next 12-hour period after that, the system has been indicated that it will likely intensify into a category 2 tropical cyclone, where we can expect destructive winds to develop around the central circulation of the system, which will actually be quite small in spatial extent, as it will likely be a fairly small tropical cyclone in its spatial extent, but not necessarily in the potential for it to develop a strong wind field. And if we also look at the grey, almost oval-like shape on the track map, this is the region of uncertainty of where this system could actually be positioned. Now, we can obviously see where the indicated track path has been marked on this map. However, there is still a large amount of variability and uncertainty within this region, hence why the expanse of the oval is quite large. And really, the system could actually be positioned anywhere within this region over the next couple of days, depending on how strong the steering influences interact with the system will determine actually exactly where the system ends up tracking. However, beyond the really 2-day forecast period where it develops into a category 2 tropical cyclone, we really don't have a good idea at this point in time of where this is actually going to continue to track. We had that initial indication of the eastward movement, and then as the northeasterly steering influences began to take over, we did see it on the forecast models begin to track back down toward the southwest near the Darwin coastline. And this is probably where we would expect it, at least at this point in time, to begin tracking. However, the exact position is fairly uncertain, hence why the track path is only really out to the next 2-day forecast period. If we switch to the European ensemble that we did look at yesterday, we can see here initially that there is a much better clustering of these member tracks, and they are weak at this time, which is obviously indicative of the position of the tropical low. There is good consensus where that will continue to track over the next 12 to 24 hours as a relatively weak system. However, beyond that, we can see that the system does continue to track eastward, which we did expect, although there is now discrepancy in what we saw yesterday, where the recurvature pattern that we have been seeing in these runs is displaced a little bit further to the east than what we had seen in previous runs. Previous runs had it a little bit more centrally, almost to the western border of the top end, but now they're a little bit more to the east and the east central portion of the NT top end. And the intensities have slightly dropped in what we had seen on the previous European model runs. In fact, most of the members are sort of like that lower to mid-range tropical cyclone threat. Some of the members yesterday there's at least 5 to 6 of them that pushed it down the western top end of the NT as a relatively strong or maybe even severe tropical cyclone into the Joseph Bonaparte Gulf. However, we can still see that there is a large discrepancy of the distance and the track path of these ensemble members. However, there is definitely a trend that the intensity, at least today's run, has slightly backed off a little bit. There's a lot less members indicating that severe tropical cyclone potential down the western portion of the NT top end. However, it certainly doesn't discount the fact that it could still be possible, but it will be something to watch as there is a large discrepancy in the intensity potential for this system. And now that the system has begun to develop further, we actually do have the high-res tropical cyclone models that are now active for this system. So we can take a look at the HAFS-A model, which is, again, one of the high-res tropical cyclone models. And if we drag this out, we can see that there is just a disorganized amount of convection ongoing north of the Tiwi Islands and Darwin over the next couple of days, really in that 24-hour forecast period, which are obviously indicated in the brighter colors here on the reflectivity. But as we drag this out, we can see it begins to track eastward that the other models had been indicating, and it does begin to develop a much stronger convective core around that central circulation. However, this model on this run does continue to progress the cyclone as a relatively disorganized system, certainly indicating here on the higher reflectivity values that the strongest portion of the system where the most intense convection is ongoing is located in the western portion over the next couple of days. It does seem to fail to actually wrap up completely, developing a symmetrical pattern around the tropical cyclone, and then it somewhat does track to the southwest, becoming a little bit more apparent in the later run hours, particularly around the Friday forecast period, and then probably landfalling just to the east or very slightly to the east of Darwin as what would be a fairly disorganized but perhaps a category 1 or category 2 tropical cyclone at this stage. And then obviously we have a very large spiral-like band trailing behind it, probably embedded thunderstorms, likely supercells with the tropical cyclone in the high reflectivity values. And then if we also switch to one of the other high-res tropical cyclone models, this is the 18Z Worth. So one of the other high-res tropical cyclone models, we can see that it is similarly, although in still a somewhat different pattern structure, we can see that it does develop this system as a relatively weak tropical low over the next 24-hour forecast period that we did anticipate, obviously indicating that that ongoing convection we saw in the satellite imagery earlier is still located on the northern portion of the system. And then as we drag this out, we can see that it, of course, is in line with the other models, tracking eastward, and then before that sort of recurvature almost to the southwest, but it does actually take it a little bit further east than the HAFS-A model did, and the landfall is actually located further to the east of Darwin, at least, than what the HAFS-A had, and certainly a much more disorganized structure. It would only likely be a low intensity tropical cyclone at this stage when it does complete that landfall. You can obviously see in the high reflectivity values, very disorganized like structure on this model run with a lacking symmetrical circulation. But certainly regardless, it's not something to disregard that the fact that this could actually wrap up into a higher intensity tropical cyclone, or certainly something more organized than what the models here are showing. But this is just what the 18Z models have shown for the system, or the latest runs have shown for the system. So something to monitor, and we will continue to monitor that over the next 24 to 48 hour forecast period to see how this evolves. And obviously with this, we can see that there is a large variability in timing, track path, and intensity. And that's pretty much going to do it for today's forecast. We're going to continue to monitor this system very closely over the next 24 hours to see how it progresses. And as we get a better idea of the potential intensity, timing, and track path that this system may actually assume, we'll continue to provide daily updates both here and on the Facebook page. So if you're not following that, please head over to the Facebook page, Outbreak Weather. And also if you're new here, please remember to like and subscribe, as well as turn on notifications for the channel so you can be provided with the latest information and weather updates regarding this system and also other severe weather impacting Australia. And that'll pretty much do it for today's forecast video. We'll catch you back tomorrow.